would you take $1 million or a conversation with Jay-Z? People have come to me and they're like, I'm good. ChatGPT made me a contract. And I want to literally lose my mind. If you're doing business, I can bet your bottom dollar that there is some regulation that's governing your business practices. So it would behoove you to understand your regulatory obligations.
Do you think the value of human experiential learning is going to change?
The pragmatic tools that you need to be able to operate day to day will only come from experience. You can read as many books as possible, but once you're in the boardroom, what are you going to do? I see a lot of handshake deals where it's like, oh, that's my brother and they would never do me wrong. But we all know even family can stab you in the back. Understand that you are here today because of all of the men and women that poured into you. It is your obligation to do the same for the next person.
Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the messy middle of building a business while navigating a professional career. I'm excited to be joined by Imani Maatuka Esq. Imani is a commercial litigator, entrepreneur, and community leader. She currently serves as the managing partner of the Dallas office of May Law, which is a Black women-led law firm founded by her mother, where she represents the third generation of leadership. Imani's career is the definition of dual ambition. Her legal practice handles complex commercial disputes and high-stakes litigation. Yet, her transition from big law to firm ownership was a deliberate move focused on generational impact and institutional growth. And beyond the courtroom, Imani is a serial entrepreneur who launched her first multimedia marketing company while still in high school and founded Law Bay Travels. She has been recognized among the National Black Lawyers Top 40 Under 40 and holds multiple distinctions from Washington University School of Law, including the Excellence Awards in Entrepreneurship and Intellectual Property Clinic. Imani, thank you for joining.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. And before we dive into the backstage of your business journey, I just have to mention something. You still maintain an active pro bono docket dedicated to veterans and habeas corpus relief. And I think that it is rare to see that level of commitment to justice for the underserved. And I just wanted to acknowledge that before we start.
Yeah, thank you for flagging that. I think a lot of people, when they enter big law, as we call it, think that they're trading off, some of their more public interest minded legal practice, when I thought it was the exact opposite. Now that I'm at a firm with more resources, more capabilities, that behooves me to prioritize public interest minded legal services even more. So since I've been a practicing attorney, I've always kept pro bono at the forefront of my mind.
That's amazing. Your journey from the front lines of corporate litigation to managing and scaling a family legacy is exactly the kind of backstage insights that our audience of 95 professionals and founders need to hear. And to my first question, the reality is that ambition does not switch off just because you have a demanding job. So what are the bad and messy trade-offs that you have had to manage a legal practice and a business simultaneously without burning out?
Yeah, I think especially more recently, there's been a focus on self-care, mental health, being more cognizant of the toll that certain industries and certain business decisions take on you. So I would say that it's been exactly that. People know that in big law, they're known for working very long hours, typically 14 to 15-hour days. And since I've been in that practice, I've always had to carve out time for the things that I'm a bit more passionate about, whether that be the scholarship program that I founded, whether that be some of my other entrepreneurial endeavors. And so I would say the main trade-off is the human cost, It's the relationships that I've lost. It's the time with family that I lose. And I think that's the things that people don't often talk about. Yes, we're all chasing our dreams and we're all ambitious and business minded, if you will. But at the end of the day, what's the real trade-off is the human cost, the lack of sleep, the lack of real relationships that you're able to foster, where you feel like you're always catching up with friends rather than just being there in the moment with them.
There's definitely those trade-offs. Most people don't see, what's going on behind the scenes, even the tears.
Yeah.
Sometimes you get to lose friends because you're moving and not everyone is able to catch up. So speaking on the back of that, from the last conversation we had, you are a huge proponent of experiential learning and using your 9 to 5 to gain like a template for your own venture. So can you share like a specific unglamorous lesson that you have learned while working for somebody else that probably saved you your own major disaster in a business?
So I've had a ton of internships throughout my life. Most recently, I've left Sidley Austin to create my venture with Maatuka Esq LLC, starting their Dallas office. But when I think back to all of those experiences, I think about two in particular. One was actually an internship that I had very early in my career. This is like circa 2017, the summer of 2017. I worked downtown Chicago for a company at the time that was called Arena Partners. And so they specialized in consulting in a myriad of ways. Clients came to them if they wanted to put on a large event. Clients also came to them if they wanted to seek funding and like sponsorships for certain events. And so I got a really great experience firsthand with all of the things that go into sponsorship acquisition, how you can fund these multi-million-dollar events from start to end, thinking of all of the different aspects that are at play. And so I think back to being a intern, just learning, okay, how do you put together the marketing deck? How do you pitch the
Yeah.
client? How do you pitch the potential sponsors?
Mm.
And what I learned then, and the more unglamorous part of it, is just being told no,
Yeah.
having to be comfortable with everything not going right, everything not going according to plan, seeing how people pivot, not only in the moment, but retrospectively. And I think that discomfort
Yes.
and having that familiarity with the discomfort made me comfortable years later with everything's not going to go right.
Hmm.
Everything's not going to go according to plan. How am I going to act in those high pressure situations? And I think the ability to learn, on the job, learn while someone else's money is at stake, frankly, learn while it's someone else's baby, and learning all of the pitfalls, things
Yes.
to safeguard yourself from, the guardrails you need in place to stop things from going wrong. I love that kind of boots on the ground mentality where you're learning there and
Mhm.
then you've gotten that experience and now you can try it out yourself later on.
You just spoke about boots on the ground, and we're going to talk about that now because there's a 2025 article that I read from PitchBook. Now, PitchBook is a financial data research company. The article was about the top
Mm,
100 universities that have produced MBA founders. So we see the likes of Harvard University, for instance, they're taking the lead and they have produced over 1,800 business owners. Those
mm,
founders have started over 1,700 companies, and they have been able to raise approximately $80 billion in total. So
mhm,
we have, other universities also mentioned in the article. And I think that has affected how some aspiring business owners think, because some of
mm.
them think that the next step to entrepreneurship is an MBA or maybe getting another degree. But you would argue that boots on the ground experience should be prioritized.
Yeah, I think in an ideal world, it'd be a little bit of both, right? I don't want to
Mhm.
discredit the value that you have from academia and learning in, a typical educational setting. I think there's value to diagnosing certain case studies, reading them over and over again, just having a general understanding of like maybe these 1,000 businesses did it XYZ way,
Mhm.
right? There's value in that, absolutely. But then you also can't discredit the value of actually being in the room, seeing how people act in these high pressure situations, understanding, especially if you're a startup, understanding like the decisions between certain entity formations versus others. How do you have those conversations with investors? What do investors care about? How do you protect yourself where when there's potential liability, whether it's respect to employee situations, whether it's with respect to securities, what do other players do in those situations? So it's like the pragmatic tools that you need to be able to operate day to day that will only come from experience.
Mm.
You can read as many books as possible, but once you're in the boardroom, what are you going to do? What are you going to say if you haven't seen, a mentor do it a dozen times over, if you haven't been able to have someone to hold your hand and guide you and kind of show you the way, you're going to be at a disadvantage. So I would argue, I think it's both, it's that happy medium where, yes, you got your credentials, you've had that experience, but then also you've had that practical experience as well. And I think we've seen people do it both ways. We've seen founders and entrepreneurs who have no academic background or any credentials whatsoever, and they've been amazing. Similarly, we've seen people who got degree after degree after degree, and then they were also successful founders. But I think, especially if you're starting from scratch, it would behoove you to not only educate yourself formally, but also experientially.
I love the balance that you just brought. I think it's important to have that balance. I can relate to everything that you've said. And I say that because I also guest lecture at a university here in Scotland, and I lecture the final year accounting and human resource management students about the practicalities or the ideal business world. So I bring basically my experience working in companies in the tech industry to the classroom, just so that they can have a feel and they have a knowledge of what is going on outside. Still, it is not enough, because what I would always say is that is just still theory.
Yeah.
But for you to be able to, experience what it is to manage a business, you need to be out there doing it, hiring, firing people. You need to be able to make all those decisions yourself. So that experience can be overemphasized. So thanks so much for sharing that. Moving on, I wanted to talk about networking, which is one of the key conversations. It's a necessity when you're building a business. And we often see people would chase the upward networking. They're trying to get maybe 1 hour with any high profile personality. But in my earlier chat with you as well, you said that you believe that lateral networking is what works. So how has building laterally provided you with the support that maybe a mentor could not?
Yeah, so as you know, I've founded several companies. One that is near and dear to my heart is a multimedia company that I founded, which you mentioned. It actually started in high school and then grew into what I would consider more of a public relations firm. But that company in particular, I started it with my peers. Now, I started it in high school, but I actually incorporated it while I was in undergraduate school at North Carolina A&T. And I think with having a company where you're founding with, the people who are in the trenches with you, growing with you,
yes,
that's where you see that true success, right? We talked, Bukola, about like how on the internet you'll see this argument about, would you take $1 million or a conversation with Jay-Z, right? And so the idea there is, I'm going to catapult my business if I just get one meeting with this entrepreneur who has done all these things. But what do you lose in that? Well, the benefit of lateral networking is, your peers are growing with you. So while you are building this business, they are simultaneously building their skills, building their acumen. You guys have that mutually beneficial relationship, right? But what also do you have? You have vulnerability. I think the issue where you're kind of like putting certain entrepreneurs on a pedestal, if you will, right? With that conversation with a Jay-Z, there's no trust in that relationship. He doesn't trust you. I don't really know why you would trust him just based on, what you think he's done or, his appearance online and his representative. But what you're really losing there is that trust and that willingness to put one another first. When you're building a business with others, when you are, trying to get it out the mud, if you will, together, you're both working towards a common goal, right? You're both at a position in your career where you're potentially vulnerable. Things aren't going right. You're figuring it out. And I think ego gets in the way a lot of times where you have someone from a more higher position of power than trying to mentor someone in a lower position of power. And it's like, they've been through it all. They're forgetting what it was like when you were first starting out, when you were figuring everything out. And so having those systems where everyone is kind of on the same page, everyone has a vested interest in your success, I think that environment is so much more beneficial for the entire team versus one person who's 10 years out of the game, already done everything. So that's kind of the strategy that I've taken. I've always been a large proponent of lateral networking and figuring out, hey, you're working on a similar project. how can we help each other? Let's expand our network that way. You know these people who I don't know. I know certain people you don't know. I'll put you on and you'll similarly put me on. And I even think about it from a legal standpoint now.
Yeah.
Like, I left a firm that is an international global law firm, right? My peers, the people who were literally in the trenches with me, 5 years from now, they could be general counsel at their own firms. And the reason why they'll call Imani Maatuka for whatever legal problem that comes up is because we were in the trenches together, right? It's not the person who was the 30-year veteran lawyer who's going to call me. It's the person who was down the hall from me. And when they had a crappy day, they were able to come in, shut their door, and chat with me. It's the person who observed me working my butt off and knew that when I said something, I had dotted my I's and crossed my T's. Those are the people that are going to refer me work now, because we built those relationships. We built that trust when it really mattered.
If you have watched this episode up to this point, please take a moment to like and subscribe to Business Backstage. It's a small action, but it makes a huge difference because it helps this podcast reach more people who need these kind of conversations and to keep bringing thoughtful and practical business learnings to the spotlight. So thanks. And now let's get back to the show. That is profound because, a number of people these days are just about the quick wins. Just 30 minutes of your time, and then I put it on social media. Everybody gets to know about me. But how much can you gain from that besides the publicity? When it comes to putting in the actual work, who will be best to speak for you, if not your peers, people that have been, like you said, in the trenches with you? I really relate with that because for myself, till today, my very first work experience in the technology industry, and that's over 13 years now, I have colleagues still referring me for certain things because of the experience that they had with me. So I want us to talk about business owners that are just starting up.
Yeah.
Especially in 2026, right now, we see that artificial intelligence has made it really easy to start a business. Just from the click of a button, anybody can have a website. You can have an app because the machine is there to just code everything for you now. But you are a lawyer. You've probably seen all the messy parts of entrepreneurship. So what would you say are some of the common costly legal mistakes that you see people making in businesses?
Yeah. So I'm going to go one by one because I think each one is deserving of a conversation.
Okay.
I think the number one issue that I see most commonly, especially for like startups, so you literally had an idea, or you decide tomorrow to go to ChatGPT or whatever, make your operating agreement, and then you file with the state, and now you have a full-fledged company, right? You've technically incorporated. I think the number one kind of pitfall that I see or costly legal mistake is misunderstanding the importance of proper entity formation, right?
Okay.
So with every single incorporation style, there are implications. You hear a lot about Delaware, right? People talk about the state of Delaware, like you should incorporate in Delaware because it's like very business friendly, but they don't understand, well, what does that actually mean? Delaware has created a very vast legal network with certain courts dedicated to business matters and the like, but if you don't understand the nuances of Delaware law, if you don't hire an attorney to hold your hand and explain all of that to you, you might be in a situation where Delaware might not have been the most favorable jurisdiction for you to actually incorporate in, right? So this idea of like, where do I incorporate? And then also, what type of entity is best for me, right? You've got your C corporations, you've got LLCs. There's a long list, and I'm not going to bore our listeners with how many different types of entities you could create. But every single entity has different consequences, right? Depending on the structure you choose, there might be tax implications, liability implications, operational ramifications. Like those are things, again, that you should be counseling a lawyer for and just figuring it out. What is best for me? Because everyone's situation is different. There's always nuanced facts and nuanced situations that might merit a certain entity over the other, or might merit a certain jurisdiction over the other. And so I would first and foremost recommend anyone who's going into that endeavor, before you incorporate it, call a lawyer, talk to them through it. It will save you a ton of money and a ton of headache in the long run. So that's number one. Number two, I would say, is inadequate contracts. So you mentioned AI. I don't know how many people have come to me very recently and they're like, oh, I'm good. ChatGPT made me a contract. And I like want to literally lose my mind, because when I look at these ChatGPT contracts, I will give them some credit. I think it's a good start.
Okay.
But I think what a lot of entrepreneurs, startups, etc., they need a more bespoke experience. They need something that's a bit more curated to what they actually care about, the type of industry they're in. When I think about certain contracts, I'm thinking about indemnification provisions. I'm thinking about what dispute resolution clauses do you have. I'm a litigator, so I typically look at contracts like, okay, if everything went wrong, right? If they didn't pay you, if the thing they were selling you never popped up, if whatever you promised that they would do, that never happened, are you protected, right? When you're using a ChatGPT or whatever AI system you're using, sometimes they're not accounting for that because they don't appreciate this is a very nuanced business relationship that you have with XYZ entity, and you need to protect yourself accordingly. So again, if you're going to enter into a contractual relationship with someone, hire a lawyer. I also see a lot of like handshake deals where it's like, oh, that's my brother and they would never do me wrong. Well, yeah, love to think of that best case scenario, but we all know even family can stab you in the back and make things very difficult for you. And so even with family, I would still call a lawyer, especially when there's a significant amount of money on the line. You're paying someone thousands, and would you be upset if you paid that money and you didn't get what you bargained for? Yes, you probably would. And then you'd be even more upset if you had to then go to a court to resolve whatever and kind of get your money back. The third thing I would say is ignoring compliance from day one. Like there are a lot of courts have made it clear that there are certain systems that have to be in place for the company to like identify and monitor compliance risks. Like I'm especially thinking about if you're going into like the cosmetic space, you have a product that you want to sell, there are certain label requirements for certain states. I'm also thinking about like healthcare generally, or not even going as specific as a certain industry. Sometimes there's registration requirements. Let's say you fell in love with Delaware for whatever reason, because people say, if you have a company, incorporate in Delaware, right? But if you are a Delaware entity, you technically need to register, let's say in Texas, as a foreign entity, because you are doing business in the state of Texas. You might be incorporated in Delaware, but now you're doing business in the state of Texas. So there's a foreign entity registration. That's a compliance risk. The state of Texas is going to be coming after you if you're operating and doing business and like you didn't get clearance basically from the state. So like compliance, thinking about compliance from day one. Again, these are things that lawyers will be able to help you with and walk you through and kind of like put you on notice of, okay, these are some things I need to be thinking about. These are all of my obligations under state law, federal law, and whatever might be applicable to you. The third and final thing I would say is failing to document important decisions, right? A lot of courts require you to demonstrate that you're exercising reasonable judgment whenever you're making like very crucial decisions, whether that be like certain board decisions, whether that be, you're issuing certain securities. Like you want to make sure that you are documenting basically everything that you do, because 10 years from now, that whatever you decided to do, not only do you want to remember, well, why did we go that way? Or why did we hire that person? Why are we thinking about this? Because everyone forgets and like you can't trust your memory. But then also like, God forbid, you get into a legal dispute or something, and you need to go back and be like, hey, what happened here? What was the issue? Why did we make sure our butts were covered? I call it a CYA, like a cover your own. Make sure that you're protected and what you're doing was sound and reasonable. So those would be probably the top like costly decisions that I see a lot of people do early on. But again, I think all of this can kind of be avoided if you have a really good lawyer that you bring in kind of day one to help you navigate a lot of these situations.
So listeners, you've heard it from Imani. She has just schooled us. You should have an academy for this. Because people need to learn about the legal side And just like you said, honestly, the ChatGPT thing cracked me up because I can so relate. There's certain
Yeah.
founders I work with on the operations side, and sometimes I would recommend getting a lawyer, and they would say, "I'm good. I have ChatGPT. ChatGPT has helped me," and I'm like, "No."
And how I feel, because I hear that all the time.
It's crazy, but thanks so much for that. Speaking on the back of that, we see
Mhm.
today somebody, like I said, can build a stunning website, or they'll just launch a sleek app in the afternoon, and to the outside world, they look like a pro. But as we look ahead, to 2026, there's this growing conversation about the difference between looking the part and actually having the scars from doing the work. With technology, it has made it very easy to mimic professionalism. So, do you think that the value of true human experiential learning is going to change? Do you think that it will become more or maybe less important for a business leader to have actually done the work?
Yeah, AI creates a veil of competence. It's almost like you have a trash bag and you just like put a flower on top of it and now it's pretty. That's what AI does for you. Like you could have literally nothing like behind, pull the curtain back to your point, and it's like, there's no real operation. The judgment regarding even from like contract negotiation, what
Mm,
terms are market, right? What risks for the company are acceptable? Because with any endeavor you're taking on, you're assuming certain risks, right? And then like how do you actually negotiate that? How do you go back and forth with someone and they send you a red line and they're pushing back on something that's really important to you? How do you get them to come to the table and see it from your point of view and really get that deal across the finish line? AI cannot do any of that for you. And so to your point, the real experiential learning, the scars, I love how you said that, the scars of actually going through the process and having that real experience, that value I think can never be replaced by AI, because
mm.
there's so much nuance, especially from a business standpoint, that AI, at least at this point, just cannot provide to you.
We have some businesses that are able to afford a litigator. They're able to afford to have an office or, an entity in Delaware. But we also have some business owners that are struggling financially. So for founders who have limited budgets, what would you say
Mm.
are the non-negotiable legal must-haves for their businesses,
Yeah,
especially in the early stage?
yeah. So I'm gonna go through the must-haves first.
Good.
Must have property for entity formation,
Okay.
with like your clear governance documents. In a lot of states, you can't even officially incorporate if you don't have that, your operating agreement. Sometimes it's called a charter, maybe it's bylaws, all that you need to actually register in a certain state, right? Other must have written contracts. I mean, I assume if we're talking with like pretty much any company, you're going to have contracts from day one. Maybe you have agreements with certain investors because you're selling off shares to just get money to have the working capital that you need. And then you're also going to have your key vendors, regardless of what entity you're in. Let's say you're in manufacturing, you're going to have vendor agreements with people who are maybe making the product for you at a much cheaper rate. And then maybe you have another agreement with distributors. And then you probably have like sales agreements with your
Mm,
actual customers. If you're selling a product to someone, like, okay, now I've given this to you. This is like governing delivery, all that. You need good contracts. You cannot rely on ChatGPT to save you, especially when you're dealing with, hundreds and thousands of dollars potentially. Another one I'd say, and this is probably not so popular, is intellectual property protection. And I attribute this, I have a brother who focuses his practice in intellectual property. But, you're a company coming out the gate, right? At minimum, you want to think about, if I have people working on my behalf, are you creating a product or something for me such that you are almost creating intellectual property rights? And am I assigning those rights for whatever inventions or whatever you create to
yeah.
kind of push and propel the company forward? Am I thinking about, okay, well, who actually owns that? Because you're really doing that for me, like, so that should actually all be under our company and all that. And then this is a non-issue, but like the other side of that is like trademarking. That's one of the things that I'd say is like a non-requisite. Like I don't
Okay.
think like there's a difference between like certain intellectual property protection and like, oh, I just need my logo trademark. You know what I mean? Like that's something I could see waiting. But then the actual intellectual property rights, especially if you have employees and they're creating things on your behalf, that's something that I'd want you to be thinking about day one. And then I go back to my compliance infrastructure, right? Like no matter the industry, especially if you're doing business in America, I can bet your bottom dollar that there is some regulation or federal entity that's governing your business practices, right? So it would behoove you to understand your regulatory obligations and document all of your processes for the
Yes.
reasons that we just stated before. So if a regulator comes in, you can say, nope, dotted my I's, cross my T's. Like that's something you definitely have to think about. And those would be like my non-negotiables from day one.
I've been taking notes because even for me, there's so much that I have to learn, about running a business, especially on the legal side. I think people tend to overlook that
Yeah.
aspect of it, and it's so important. I mean, your new venture in Dallas is officially opening.
Yeah, it officially opens in March. So,
Perfect.
a few
Super.
days from now. Yeah, but
Congratulations in advance.
thank you. Thank you
So,
so much.
Imani, how does your firm aim to bridge the gap between founders who are navigating the US market?
Yeah. What we're doing, especially with the Dallas office, is we're bringing big law sophistication, if you will, to provide a founder friendly service. I mean, I tell people all the time, while I was at my bigger law firm, I tried to bring a number of clients to the firm. I've been an entrepreneur for the really larger part of my life. It's just kind of in my blood. I always wanted to have my own clients. And so I was eager to bring those clients to the door. But it was disappointing for me to learn that my rates at that time with that firm were just way too astronomical and they were unfeasible for my clients to really use me. I was like being billed out close to 1400 an hour. And so like I can understand how for a startup and a smaller business how that's just not feasible. Now with leaving my international law firm, I now have an opportunity to bring that same level of experience, that same level of sophistication, that same attention to detail and that acumen that I've gained, but at a more cost effective rate for my clients. So now you're getting the experience without the crazy price tag. And I think that's what the biggest differentiator is that we can bring to especially these founders, is that you're getting people with great legal acumen, but you're getting it at a more cost-effective price so that you are not busting your budget just by trying to protect yourself.
That's great. I think that most founders would appreciate that. And wishing you all the best with your business. Is it exciting? Are you nervous about launching in March?
Yeah, it's really a dream come true. My mother is an attorney. She founded her first law firm in 2004, and then she merged with a man named Robert Dodd to create Dodd and Maatuka in 2009. He had started his firm in 1974. So technically, Maatuka Esq has been around since 1974. And so the fact that we have just so much institutional knowledge and that I now have the opportunity to litigate alongside my mother is unparalleled. And it is the opportunity of a lifetime. So yes, I'm nervous because obviously it's a whole new endeavor and there's a lot to get ready for, but I am so excited at the same time. I mean, it is just going to be so much fun and I cannot wait to help so many of our clients now and later.
Amazing. I also like the fact that it's launching in March, which is where we have the International Women's Day or International Women's Month. And I'm just going to ask you one question about it. The theme for this year is give to gain, right? It's all about the idea that when we lead with generosity and collaboration, actually create more success for everyone involved. You have lived through this, bridging the gap, just like you talked about, you have the scholarship. So, as a word for the women who will be listening to this podcast, whether they're in the big law or they're maybe running a side hustle or leading a family legacy like you, how can they practically apply this give to gain mindset to advance their own careers?
Yeah, I think it starts with a charge. We all owe a moral debt. We are all a totality of circumstances. I am here today because of all the women and men who opened doors for me, who made calls on my behalf, who answered the cold email when they saw an eager first year law student who didn't know much but was interested and wanted to propel herself forward. I am a representation of all of my mentors who poured into me and gave me their time and
Yes.
who gave me little golden nuggets of the things that they did so I didn't have to make the same mistakes that they made over the
Yes.
course of their career. We owe that moral debt to the next generation. So I would say it starts with a charge. Understand that duty. Understand that you are here today because of all of the men and women that poured into you. And understanding that, know that it is your obligation to do the same for the next person. So opening that door, reaching back for the next person to come and be in the same position, or if not the same, better than where you see yourself situated today. So I would put that call out to all the women, especially in International Women's Month, and just open the door for the next generation.
Yeah, thank you so much for that charge. And to wrap things up, Imani, we're going to do a quick fire round. It's called green flag, red flag. So nothing complicated. I'd read a professional habit for you or a
Okay,
business situation, right? And you will tell me if it's green flag, meaning you love it. If it's red flag, it means you're running the other way. Let me know when you're ready.
I'm ready.
Okay, good. So for founders who say, I'll fix the legal bit later.
Red flag. Red flag.
Red flag. We don't need a contract. I trust you, Imani.
Red flag. Super red flag.
Okay. 3, investing in a solid legal foundation before the first big expansion.
Green flag.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay. 4, scaling a business only after the core operations are stabilized.
Green flag.
5, AI generated contracts.
Red flag, red flag, red flag. Oh my God.
Okay, great. And for the last one, this is not green or red. I just want your own opinion. Family business, is it a blessing or is it a lot of pressure?
I think it's both, but I think some of our greatest blessings can be the ones that bring us out of our comfort zones, demand more of us, and really make us grind. So I welcome the pressure. I welcome the uncomfortability. I welcome the opportunity to carry the torch of my mother's legacy. I mean, that is unparalleled. Like I said, I want to go back to one of the things you mentioned. So there's this saying right now about whether AI will replace lawyers. And I don't think AI is going to replace lawyers ever
Okay.
because, like I said, there's just so much nuance that AI, especially at this point, can't capture. But what AI will do is it'll replace lawyers who don't use AI. So that is food for thought.
It will replace lawyers who do not use AI.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. That's really good to know. Thanks so much for that. And Imani, how can viewers and listeners contact you if they want to?
Yeah, you can find me on imanimaatuka.com. I'm also on Instagram at Imani Maatuka. I'm on LinkedIn at Imani Maatuka as well. Or you can find me on my scholarship page, www.bridgingthegapscholarship.com.
Fantastic. Imani, thank you so much for joining us today. Key takeaway today is compliance. You need them. Hire a lawyer. Document important decisions. The must-have for businesses, you need to get registered. You need to have written contracts. As Imani said, you need good contracts. She also said that AI will replace lawyers that don't use AI. So that's really important. So really, there is no shortcut for boots on the ground experience. So whether you are a professional working 9 to 5, you are a tech founder looking to scale into the USA, the systems that you build and the lateral relationships that you nurture will determine your sustainability. For the listeners, if you want to follow Imani's journey as she opens up the new Dallas office, we've included all her details in the show notes. And if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave us a review on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. Until next time, I am Bukola Osuntui, and I will see you on the next episode.